Hi, folks. Welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's and other emerging markets, digital and internet economy. I'm your host, Paolo Aquino, and we're back with season 7 of our show. So, for this particular episode, I'm really happy to be joined by one of our portfolio CEOs who's joined this particular portfolio company not that long ago, but he's had quite a breadth of experience in fintech and payments across different geographies and across different companies as well. I'm pleased to be joined by none other than Pratyush Prasanna, who is the current group CEO of Flip. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us early in the morning. I believe you're calling from Singapore today.
Thanks, Paulo, for inviting me. Glad to be here. Yes, it is a bit early, but that's fine. I'm a morning person.
I'm a morning person as well, so I always like to get these calls in early in the morning. But just a little bit on Pratyush before we head into our discussion. So as I mentioned, he's led many different tech companies over the years. He's a serial entrepreneur, tech CXO. He started with a mobile solutions company in India, which was acquired by Paytm. And then he became a VP at Paytm, and then started an AI company before joining Poynt, which is by GoDaddy, and then becoming head of Asia for Poynt. And then joined Gojek. I think this was around the pandemic, around 2020, and became senior vice president for merchant payments. And then most recently joined Flip as MD and then CEO over the past year. Yeah, so quite the career, and I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into some of the learnings and what Pratyush is most excited about when it comes to Flip. So let's start with that. Yeah, it's 2025, and Flip has been around for quite some time, 8-9 years, and has really seen like the Indonesian fintech landscape really evolve and has had an impact as well on, I would say, like Indonesian culture as well, payment culture. So what are you most excited about Flip having joined the company over the past year?
Thanks, Paulo. As you rightly mentioned, it's an interesting year, right? 2025 will be an interesting year for a few reasons, right? One is that Flip is, I think, at the cusp of being a path-breaking company, and I'll tell you why, right? More importantly, I also believe that companies can do a lot of things, but it actually works when the macros align for it, right? I think in Indonesia, the macros are quite well aligned for us to leverage that and go from here, right? Flip has been, as you rightly said, has been in the consumer space, helping people do P2P transfers or send money to each other. But that forms our base, right? On top of that, we have been also successful in terms of giving users multiple avenues to spend and make sure that they can do more transactions through us, right? But generally speaking, I don't think of businesses in that way. What I think of is how can we be adding significant value in an incremental basis to our users' lives, right? So in Flip, we have 3 business units. One is the consumer, the second is B2B, and the third is lending. And in each of these, we look at what customer scenarios are we addressing as a part of our products, right? Not as much in terms of transacting or making them spend more time or making them do higher value transactions, but more in terms of what are the core issues for our customers and merchants that we are solving. So that's the way that we look outward, right? Now, if you look inward, Indonesia is at the cusp of growth because there is political stability, which is very important in any country to grow. And there is an intent from the regulators to actually grow and be much more open for everyone to compete. Now, that is also quite important because it enables that the playing field is level for everyone. And if you innovate and if you keep your customers and merchants happy, you will be growing. Indonesia in the last 3 to 4 years has come up with epoch-making initiatives like BI Fast, for example, which I think is going to disrupt and actually make life easier for the normal Indonesians, as well as multiple other initiatives in terms of cracking down on fraud, in terms of cracking down on illegal activities, in terms of making sure that the money flow is efficient, etc. All these help real companies build bigger businesses, the same way as it happened in India or in China. Last but not the least, Indonesia is also a very big market, as in population-wise. We are like 280 million people, and the GDP is also justifies the growth, right? There is a research by McKinsey that once the GDP crosses that $5,000 mark on an annual basis, people have money to spend or have income which can be reinvested, right? So we want to be in that particular phase where we not only help you do payments, but we also help you save money, and we also help you invest, and we also help you grow, whether it's a customer or it's a merchant. Just to give you, maybe we can talk about a little bit more specifics later. But just to give you one specific examples, a lot of our users came to us and say, hey, if I can transfer money to Ari in Indonesia, why can't I transfer money to Paolo in Singapore, right? Great question. But from a technology perspective, as you can imagine, it's domestic transfers versus international transfers. But consumers don't think that way. Consumers think that if I can transfer money to Mr. X, why can't I transfer it to Mr. Y who's in Singapore? We said, okay, great question. Let us get back to you, right? So in 3 to 4 months, we actually released our own cross-border remittance product. And now we are one of the biggest non-bank remittance player in about 1.5 years.
This is Flip Globe, right?
Flip Globe, yes.
Yeah.
But the origin of that was when we keep talking to customers constantly, and then customers said that, hey, if I can transfer money to X Indonesia, why can't I transfer him to in Singapore or Malaysia, wherever else? So the key is to keep listening to the heartbeat of customers, what they want, what are their pain points, etc., and build products without thinking of the complexities in between. Some of them might be too complex. If we can have solutions which help the customers, they will stick around with you. One more data point before I hand it back to you is that because we have been so customer obsessed, right? Our NPS is like 89. I'm quite proud of that. And it's one of the reasons I joined the company in the first place, which is because that kind of NPS means you're doing a really good job at enabling and helping customers.
That's a great way to really set up our conversation. And I think this whole mindset of being customer obsessed, focusing on product, regardless of how far the company has grown, is really, I think, continuing a tradition that really started with the founders when they launched their first MVP, and that has stayed on even through your leadership as well. And you talked about Flip Globe, which has been running for a few years now, and yeah, great to know it's really sort of market leading in that regard when it comes to remittances, and obviously you have that high NPS, which you mentioned is one of the reasons why you were attracted to Flip. So speaking of that, I also wanted to get into that whole decision to join this company and take it to the next level. So maybe you can start first with how you got to know about Flip and how you got to know about Ari. And yeah, apart from the NPS, what are the other reasons that you decided to join? And yeah, let's start with that.
So before Flip, I was with Gojek. I left Gojek and then I was trying to figure out what to do next, right? And then Ari reached out to me and said that while you are still figuring out, why don't you help us with our strategy, right? I said, okay, sure. Let's talk about what you do, because I knew about Flip as a company and I'd used it as a user, but I did not know like the breadth, right? Obviously, as an outsider, it's difficult to know. So once Ari started talking to me, it became an interesting conversation. And I said, let's start working together for some time and see where this goes, right? Within a week of me trying to help Ari is like, let's forget about advisor. Please join us full time because we can do some really cool stuff together, right? I said, okay, that's interesting, but let's talk to a few more people, including the other founders, right? So I talked to Lukman, I talked to Anjar as well. And what I saw was that there was, typically companies have a tagline, and which is the motto of the company, and then do something which is completely opposite or different, right? But in Flip's case, the tagline is fair financial services for every Indonesian, right? I saw that there was a real intent by all three of them to actually help normal people do things better. It reflects in every one of our products. If you see, we consistently try to reduce the cost of doing operations, increase the efficiency, make sure that your money reaches on time, and also introduce a suite of products which are relevant for customers, right? And we do a lot of machine learning in terms of targeting the right product to the right kind of people, right? So all that over the course of a month, I tried and gave specific feedback as well as learned about what is the scope that we can do. And then I joined the board as a managing director after talking to all our investors and the key people in the company, right? Continued at that for about 6 months. And then again, by mutual consent with Ari, Lukman, Anjar, and our investors, then I took over as CEO, where, I head the overall Flip group. Just to give you an idea, as I mentioned, we have 3 lines of business, consumer, Flip for business, and lending. Each of these, again, Ari and I made sure that the structure is best for delivery. So Ari heads the consumer piece, I head the business piece, and a gentleman called Hari heads the lending piece. And all 3 kind of report to me, right? So that strategically, all 3 of us work together in order to do what is best for the company, right? So we made sure that the structure is enabled for faster delivery, but at the same time is coherent together. With Ari's support and with all the other founders and investors' support, we tried to make sure that there is a structure which allows us to fire on all cylinders, so to say. Last but not the least, I think generally speaking, any new person coming in is like an organ replacement, right? Or organ transplant. But thankfully, because I didn't come in as CEO on day zero, I took over as CEO on month 6. It was a gradual process, and we did a lot of structural changes so that the change is easier to digest. And also people, way of working, got to know who are the people who are important in the particular set of things and go from there, right? So it was good that we took our time with the support of the founders and the investors, of course. And that's how it worked out.
It's quite interesting you mentioned that with this kind of new structure, you're able to quote you, like fire on all cylinders, faster delivery, have specific leaders focus on the 3 kind of like branches of the group, which I think creates more efficiency for the company. I was curious to know as well how this whole endeavor, this new endeavor for you has impacted you as a leader as well. Is there anything you think has changed with your style since you joined Flip?
Every company is new and has its own nuances, right? And I have run a company of my own earlier, so I know the challenges, right? So running a company is like drinking from a fire hose, right? You have multiple things and it comes to you at very great speed. So you have to be ready for it, right? As I mentioned, every company has its own nuances, but I think I had the distinct advantages of A, running my own company earlier, and B, working in Indonesia as well, right? Through Gojek.
Yeah.
So that way, I think the challenge was much easier to handle, because had one of these factors not been there, it would have been an even bigger learning curve, right? But I was lucky that those 2 had happened earlier, and it was relatively easy for me to step in and take over this role. Having said that, I think it's still, every company has its challenges, how to build better technology, which technology to invest in, which not to. Also, what are the processes that we should set? And I think, again, because Ari and I focused a lot in terms of making sure that our team constantly evolves and upgrades, we have been able to address these challenges. But again, it has been a significant learning experience as well, right? Because Flip is not a small company. It is a huge company with 400 people all across different parts of Indonesia. We have an office in Jakarta. We have an office in Jogja. We have a few people elsewhere as well. And we were also coming out of COVID, right? So it suddenly afforded us the ability to work from office, which is much more optimal in that sense. Just to let you know, last year in January, we took over a new office because people came back in, and it has been spectacular, right? Our output and the way that we work has changed back to what it was before COVID, giving better results as well, right? But having said that, I think it's a learning phase. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to see, and I do come across new stuff every day. But as we keep on upgrading, I think we'll be able to handle most of the challenges that life throws at us.
Before I get into the kind of the new stuff, which I would love to talk about, I also wanted to go through like your quote unquote discography of of a career and sort of the highlights. I think one of the early highlights from your career is after several years of working at big tech, you founded your own company, which was then acquired by Paytm. I want to focus specifically on that whole acquisition experience. And at that time, you were a first-time founder, is that correct? And what was the big takeaway from that journey of getting acquired?
So this was in 2013, I think, so like 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. But it was quite interesting because we actually looked at raising a round for that company. And as a part of that, the investors who were thinking of investing, Paytm was one of their portfolio companies. And they wanted me to talk to Vijay, just for Vijay to just get a gut feel of what is happening. Vijay talked to me and Vijay was like, why are you doing all this? Let's just join and do what Alipay and Tencent did it in China, right? So then that's what the conversation was. And Vijay, I don't know if you've met him, is a very reality distortion kind of guy. That's it.
I guess you have to be a reality distortion kind of guy to come up with to build a company like Paytm.
Yeah, it was a different matter that obviously there was a very good deal and investors were happy, the board was happy, etc. But overall, it was like, hey, we can actually change the world. And this was even when I joined Paytm, we had 2 million users. When I left Paytm, we had 100 million downloads. So we did actually change reality to a large extent.
What was the company that was acquired doing?
So the company was called PlusText, PLUSTXT. It was a text messaging app, very similar to WhatsApp, but in local languages. And the idea was that India, and this was in India, so the idea was that India has like hundreds of languages, and English, of course, it's the most common language, but most people don't talk in English. So can we enable messaging in that? And Vijay's point was that you've seen WeChat Pay, and chat is a essential enabler in payments. Why don't you join us and let's do that for India, which again worked out well for both sides.
And so you mentioned that when you joined Paytm, 2 million users, and then when you left, 100 million downloads. So you've definitely seen like an explosion in India. And obviously, when it comes to payments, a lot of people often refer to UPI as a model for kind of like infrastructure within like a geography or country when it comes to digital payments. So what are your takeaways coming into Indonesia as well from India when it comes to really building out this whole digital payments industry?
I think India was a pathbreaker in many ways, right? So there was the Chinese model, which was Alipay plus WeChat kind of closed, right?
Right.
But India started off with individual companies like Paytm and PhonePe and others have their own stacks. But the regulators were very clear that we will have to have interoperability and we have to reduce the costs overall. In fact, cost in India is zero, right? So they were visionary in that aspect that we will make sure that this happens and the common man on the streets, A, adopts internet or digital payments, and B, it is cheap, right? So with that sense, they came up with UPI. Of course, it has gone through its own evolution. Incumbents have changed, but I think they were quite good in terms of adapting the system to the needs of the country, right? That has formed the model for everyone else. I think the advantage that Indonesia had was that they could see the India example. And I think Indonesia has done an even better job in that sense, right? Because obviously there is the advantage of hindsight, right? Indonesia, I think the way BI Fast has been rolled out and it has started being adopted, right? I think it's a matter of time again when it will be pervasive, both for consumers and merchants. And it'll be every company should take advantage of it. We will definitely take advantage of that going forward. But I actually think that newer businesses are created when there are seismic events like that, right? Why? Because it will definitely make sure that the incumbents are disrupted. And I think most of the incumbents, whether it's a consumer side or merchant side, will be disrupted. And it's a good thing because consumers will be benefited at the end of the common man on the streets, the common Indonesians will be benefited at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I was curious to know what your view is on how this types of infrastructure, UPI or BI Fast, reshapes the competitive landscape. Because I guess prior to like these kinds of infrastructure, a lot of competition can be driven around pricing or cost. But then with something leveling out the landscape, like what becomes the competitive dimensions for these companies and new entrants? What are you guys competing over? Is it more of a product experience or are there other aspects to it?
No, I think it'll be three things, right? It'll be three things. One is obviously product experience, right? Product experience is what really matters for the customers and the merchants. And that's a non-negotiable. For me, that's a hygiene factor to have because if you don't have a great product experience, you are in trouble, right? No question about it. So that's number one. Second, I think, is that efficiency/new business models are also going to come in. I do not know what those would be, but from historical evidence, it is always going to come in. I think we have a general idea, not we as in Flip, but we as an industry have a general idea, but it will evolve. It will not be the same as India for sure, right? It will not be the same as China, right? So what are those new business models? How will they create new businesses is still the jury is out for that one, right? The third one, which is also very important, is regulatory compliance. Most fintechs like to think that they're banks, but they're not banks, right? So what happens is that banks are great because they have figured out a way over hundreds of years how to understand their customers better, how to give them loans, how to take loans back from them, how to give them savings bank accounts, etc., when to reach out them for loans, right? What fintechs do is, or have been doing, is that they take a sliver of one activity, whether it is loans or whether it is anything else, and do a really good job at it. Because of that, as you very well know, across the world, right, there have been instances where fintechs have not been regulatorily compliant, right? And now the regulators are reframing laws for the new reality, which is fintechs and real-time payments, etc. It is imperative that not only us, but any other company is on top of that particular game. Because I think, and there was a really nice article by Vijay a few days ago, is that I think innovation has to be built around regulatory compliance and not the other way around. All the Silicon Valley talk of break it before
and break things.
break things doesn't actually work for tech because unlike Instagram, where you can break whatever you want, in fintech overall as a category or finance overall as a category, you're dealing with other people's money. You can't break stuff. And you definitely cannot be going against the rules of the land, right? I have built that as almost like a philosophy inside the company that we will be very clean always. We will not do shady stuff at all. So one thing you will be assured that you will never see Flip in one of those non-cool activities that the way that we put it in.
I wanted to also focus on your time at Gojek, right? And this was your initial sort of introduction to Indonesia. What are your initial impressions of Indonesia tech, especially in terms of the culture and how Indonesians work together and how that also impacted your own leadership style coming from India?
Gojek was for me eye-opening experience. And also I like to think that I actually worked in 3 different companies at Gojek. Why? Because the first company that I joined was Gojek, right? Then we went through the whole merger with Tokopedia. And then we went for the IPO and all the post-IPO stuff, right? All 3 experiences are what I proudly treasure because arguably Gojek is one of the best tech companies in Indonesia. No question about it, right? With Nadeem and Aldi and all the business leaders, Gojek created a culture of how can we have the best tech company working almost like a Silicon Valley company, while of course addressing Indonesians' need, whether it is getting a cab or whether it is getting food delivery or whether it is getting payments, right? And as they're hugely successful at it. When I joined, I actually did not see much difference from like a cutting edge Indian company. I actually moved from the Bay Area or a Bay Area company because it was run very much like a Bay Area company. Most of the founders also had some amount of experience either working for or working in the US or an American company. So I think Gojek for me, it formed the fundamentals of how to work in Indonesia and how to cater to the needs of Indonesians. And also Gojek had a very high consumer obsession culture, which is why most of the products took off immediately, right? So overall, my experience with Gojek was fantastic in terms of learning about Indonesia, working on the ground, as well as creating the culture.
It's quite interesting how Flip has preceded a lot of these different kind of evolutions in fintech for Indonesia. It preceded Curious, preceded BI Fast, a lot of the eKYC regulation, and has been there to witness and play a part in all those developments. How would, having been a user as well, and then part of the board, and then now CEO of Flip, like how would you sum up Flip's impact on kind of this whole Indonesia fintech journey? I guess you already hinted at it in the start of our conversation, and its role to play in the next few years.
I think there are 2 angles to look at it. One is what can we do? And the second is what is the country ready for, or what is the market ready for? Digital payments and digital transactions are here to stay. No question about it. It's a one-way road on which Indonesia has already started. And some countries like China and India started a little earlier, right? What we or any other player in the market can do is just make sure that we enable it better. Also, a lot of our investors or potential investors or even partners ask us that, hey, how do you differentiate versus some of your competitors, right? My general answer to that is that all of us can be, or most of us can be successful as long as we build good products. Now, why is that important? It is important because historically, if you see in India, Paytm is big, but so is PhonePe, so is Google Pay, right? So are multiple other players, right?
Not necessarily a one player wins all.
Yeah, there is no one player thinks all, one player wins all is a very easy mental construct, but it actually doesn't happen in real life, right? In real life, multiple players win, always, right? And in my mind, what we want to do at Flip is to be relevant, which is very important, close to the customer, hear their needs, and quickly evolve around products. Because we are small, we can do it faster than most of the others. And at the same time, make sure that we are doing it in a fair way, which is our core. As long as we are true to these 3 principles, we'll be fine. We will actually make money and become a big company.
I was curious to know, like, where do the marginal differences come into play? Is it, you talk about experience and like transaction efficiency, specifically what aspects of that whole customer experience you think the marginal differences will be won, quote unquote? Is it in terms of like settlement for merchants? Is it in terms of, do you have any kind of like clues to share with us?
Marginal differences obviously do matter, right? For example, I think the biggest difference is always cost. All of us are very cost sensitive, especially people who do not earn much, right? They're very cost sensitive, which is fine, right? So I think cost is one of the biggest factors. And again, the way that it will happen, I think, is that there is going to be a standardized cost, which nobody will go below, then they'll start losing money, right? So cost is no longer going to be a factor after some time because standardization of cost is going to happen, right? The second one will be efficiency, which is how fast can you, let's say, transfer money, or how fast can you complete a transaction? And what is the failure rate of that transaction, right? That is something definitely we can optimize, and so can everyone else, right? But I think that is a game that will be won by technology, which is why, again, a lot, I cannot actually mention names, but a lot of banks also use our infrastructure for payments because we do it for consumers at such a large scale that our systems are almost always up, 99.99% up. The bank systems, if they build it themselves, are up, but not at that scale because we are at a much bigger, we are at 100 times their scale, right? Not the bigger banks, but smaller banks. So technology-wise, we will always continue to differentiate. And the third one, which I mentioned, is very qualitative, which is, do we actually have the ears to the ground for customer needs going forward? Like one example.
NPS, summed up by the
Yeah.
NPS metric, I guess.
No, even the Flip Globe one, right?
Right.
That was like an eye opener for us because customers are saying that, okay, I need to send money to Singapore. How do I do it better? And our customer base is arguably bigger than most of the remittance companies, right? How can we leverage that particular base for a product that customers are asking for, right? So I think being honest and being true and being close to the customer is also quite important. And that's where the marginal will come in, right? Lastly, we are fair in terms of costs.
Going back to wrap up our conversation, we've talked a lot about what you've seen across the industry over the years that you've been in fintech and also like your own experiences growing and leading companies. Whenever faced with a tough challenge, is there a particular past experience or story that you draw hope or strength from as an entrepreneur whenever navigating challenges that you face as a leader?
Maybe I'll share it offline with you, but I have a document called Working with Pratyush, right? Where it's a document that I've had since my first job, but it's more about how I have evolved and what are my philosophies as a person, right? One philosophy, there are multiple, but the main one is what is commonly called as strong opinions loosely held, which means you build an opinion on the basis of experience, on the basis of reading, on the basis of research, right? But hold it loosely. Why? Because there might be data that you haven't touched. There might be an opinion or experience that you haven't experienced, which could be totally contrarian and right. Strong opinions loosely held is actually from I think it's from the Oracle at Delphi, where all rulers were told that don't be biased or don't be married to a particular philosophy or principle, because even though it might seem right, it might not be right. So be open for alternatives, because that's the way thought processes and companies evolve, right? So that's what I hold very close to my heart, where obviously we go building new technology that we think are right, but be open to what can come in, or contrarian points of view, or others' opinion.
Is there a specific example where that has manifested that you can share with us?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For example, you know that Twitter, for example, was a part of another company called Odeo, which was an ad network, right? They carved it out, and Twitter is a epoch-making, path-breaking company, right? Totally different from an ad network in that sense, right? Similarly, Berkshire Hathaway started off as a very different company, right? And then now it's one of the world's biggest, if not the biggest investor in the world, right? They started off with an operating company, right? And one of the founders of Berkshire Hathaway, a guy called Charlie Munger, has this as one of his, he died last year, I think. Yeah, he died last year.
Right, yeah.
So he has this as one of his tenets, right? Have to have strong opinions, but you hold them loosely. But again, the key also is to have strong opinions as well, because if you don't have strong opinions, people will ride all over you, right? So make sure that you have a point of view which is built on facts, data, experiences, etc.
Yeah, and I think that just goes back to what we started a conversation with just customer obsession and really listening to the pain points, because you never know what you will discover. I think that whole story with Flip Globe, for example, is a great example in Flip's regard. And who knew that? I'm not sure if Ari predicted back when he started the company in 2015 that you guys Flip would end up doing remittances as well, end up doing like merchant payments and even lending today. So it's definitely a much larger impact company than what they initially started out with. And then that's really, I think, the magic of tech and startups. So yeah, on that note, thanks so much, Pratyush, for joining us early in the morning. And yeah, I really enjoyed learning about your journey. I'm sure you have a lot of, you have that document you mentioned, which I really love that you're able to like reflect and really document kind of your own personal evolution. Let us know, for those listening, let us know in the comments if you also have like those similar practices as well. We'll leave Pratyush's LinkedIn in the podcast description in case you want to connect with him and take this conversation further. But in the meantime, do stay tuned for more of these conversations with CXOs like Pratyush on their own kind of points of view, strong opinions loosely held, and also their own entrepreneurial journeys as well. Yeah, thank you again, Pratyush, for joining us, and I will see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you so much.